Wow, what a day. We're in Spain. We're about 2.5 hours northeast of Barcelona, up near the Pyrenees, and we're here for KTM's 2020 model launch. It's been a fantastic day. The facility here is amazing. There's been a really good cross-section of terrain from, like single trail, snotty stuff, wet stuff, extreme stuff, fast open flowy stuff, some special tests. So it's been a really, really good way to be able to test these bikes, and we kind of needed it because it's always sort of tough at these KTM launches. You come along and you've got 7 bikes to test. So doing all that in a day, getting a really good feel for the bikes is sort of difficult, and it's difficult to speak with a great deal of conviction about each specific bike. But I guess, today I just want to give you a bit of a sense of, what we felt here today at the launch. We've done some fantastic interviews with some of the designers to give you more insights into the background of the developments on the bikes, what they've done and why. And also, we'll have a little bit more feedback about each bike specifically. So let's talk about these things, the 2020 models. So the same 7 models. On the 2-stroke side, you've got the 150, the 250 and the 300. On the 4-stroke side, the 250, 350, 450 and 500. The big news, I suppose, is that the fact that the 150, that was an XCW, is now homologated for Euro 4, which means it's become an EXC. So it's an EXC TPI, so that 150. But let's put some context around these things. We knew we're coming along, these 2020s were going to be, new generation, big step up, big difference from their predecessors. But let's just look back quickly. Obviously the last big upgrade that KTM brought to the market on the enduro side of things was back in 2017, where they brought all 7 new models came out, all new frame, all new suspension. The Explore suspension, fork and shock, was introduced to the bikes for the first time. The counterbalancer engine was introduced to the 250 and 300 2-stroke, and completely new engines and ergos back then as well. So what are the 2020s? Let's just do a bit of a sort of recap on what they have got. I mean, it's pretty easy when you look at the things, they don't look super different to the naked eye. But when you look in a little bit more detail, you see that they are significantly new. They're much more than refinements. And when you look at the sort of collective upgrades that they've done to the bikes, across the chassis, the engine, the suspension and the ergos, you have to say that they're, it's I don't know about an overhaul. It's pretty close to it. It's definitely a drastic evolution of the bikes that have come before it. So let's do a little bit of a recap. I guess so. Just on the sort of rolling chassis side, the frame, I think, is about 50% of the parts are new. They've stayed with the same geometry with the frame, but they have changed the stiffness of the thing, and really interestingly gone a little bit stiffer, both longitudinally and torsionally on the frames. Bodywork, really big changes across the board, and pretty much mirror what you saw on the 2019 motocross bikes from KTM. Big work on the interface, much lower shrouds. I think they're about 12 mm lower, give you a lot more sort of room under in the cockpit. It's slimmer through the rear end and a little bit more symmetrical. Obviously the seat is actually a lot more padded. Same seat line as you've got on the motocross bikes, but a little bit more padded. So on the engines, there's been some, increased, quite a few mods across the board. I guess top line, when you're looking at it, the 250, 350 4-strokes have got more compression. They've had some top end, some new cases. The 450 engine is remarkably different. The head's come down about 15 millimeters and lost about 500 grams off the top of the head, same as what we saw in the motocross bike last year. So that's significant. And then the 2-strokes got a lot of refinement to their to their mapping, to the EMS system, but particularly the exhaust. Been a huge amount of work going into the exhaust, both for 4-strokes and 2-strokes. And the 2-strokes have adapted those oval section exhaust, and you can see here on the 6-stroke model standing here, they've got some ribbed sections on the thing as well. So what do we think? And again, we'll go into each of the 7 bikes in a little bit more detail in a separate piece on the website. But let's look from an engine point of view. They've really stuck with that sort of usability, making sure that they're rideable, that the performance is better across the board. I think torque is probably the thing that stood out for me, and rideability of all the engines. In particular, I'd have to say the 2-strokes. I think they got their TPI fuel injection is a much more sophisticated system now, so that I think they've come forward a long way. 250 and 350 4-strokes feel a lot more torquey. 450, 500, just the big beast of the paddock, but amazing how agile those things are. The really interesting thing, I probably think the standout thing for me today here at the launch was the difference in the chassis and the suspension. The really interesting thing what they've done, I suppose KTM with the Explore fork and shock probably been a little bit, they've been accused of being probably a little bit soft in the front relative to the rear. The front has dived a little bit. It's been a bit of an issue. It's pretty easy to tune out of the bikes, and a lot of guys do that if you're a little bit faster. What they've done, interestingly, for the 2020 models, is they've actually gone to softer spring rates in the fork, same shock spring rates, but softer spring rates on the fork. For the 450 and 500, that's actually 2 rates softer. So I think they're down to a 4.2 Newton millimetre spring rate on the fork. But they've coupled that, or they've offset that with firmer damping. The idea being, that instead of it sort of falling down against the spring and actually diving when you hit the brakes or heading downhill, the bike sits up in its stroke a lot better. The damping picks up that compression earlier in the stroke and doesn't allow it to get into sort of hobby horse behaviour. So the reason I say it's standout is that creates a really stable chassis. You don't get a lot of that hobby horse stuff. It feels really stable downhill. You really know what the front wheel's doing. It's super planted. But look, the other thing, I think, as I said with the motocrossers a year ago, just the interface. Look, it might sound like a bit of a mincy word, but everywhere you touch this bike, nothing jags. You've got heaps of space. Your boots don't snag on anything. And when you're not thinking about, climbing around the bike and you can move around in the cockpit easily, you can focus on lines and just enjoying the ride. So look, I came into today really looking forward to, 2 bikes, I guess, the 150 two-stroke and the 450, because I think in a lot of ways those things were probably the landmark on paper anyway. The landmark new models, and they were both great. Don't get me wrong, they were both great. And the 150's got the bottom end of a 200. It's almost replaced that 200, and I think it pulls a similar sort of power as that. 450 again, like a big jump up from its predecessor just in terms of agility. But look, I couldn't help myself today. The standouts for me were the 250 EXC two-stroke. I think it's really the mapping on that 250 two-stroke now has helped it narrow the gap to the 300. The 300's a huge seller both here in Europe, and in Australia. I think it's the biggest selling bike in both markets. And there's good reason for that. It's very torquey and really forgiving and user-friendly. But I think the 250 sort of, really closed the gap on it. It's got the torque, it'll pull through the bush, and it's a really fun little racy thing. But if I have to choose one bike, it's the 350, the all-rounder. It's got the playfulness of a 250 EXC. And you can muck around, but you don't have to be tiptoeing on the gearbox the whole time to keep it in the meat of a power, because it's got the torque of the big capacity bikes, and it's just a joy to throw around. So, look, as I say, it's difficult to go into too much depth with these bikes. We've only had one day, but we've done a hell of a lot of riding, and I'm feeling pretty secondhand from it. But a big step up, and I think refinement isn't a strong enough word to talk about these bikes. It has been a really big evolution, and I guess I think everybody's going to be pretty impressed with these things. So, as I said, we've got a bunch more content coming out on the website. Interviews with the designers and more insights into the specific models. So, stay tuned for that on the website.